Alright, let's talk about something cheery, shall we? No, I'm kidding. We're diving headfirst into the endlessly fascinating and deeply unsettling world of the death penalty. It's a topic that tends to elicit strong opinions, and rightfully so. After all, we're talking about the state-sanctioned taking of a human life. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to think. My goal here is to present a nuanced, factual look at the death penalty as it exists around the world today. America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, and, well, a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to the death penalty. The US has this complicated relationship with capital punishment. On one hand, it's one of the few Western developed nations that still clings to it. On the other hand, support for the death penalty has been steadily declining in recent years, and more states are opting to abolish it altogether. The death penalty is reserved for a specific set of offenses like murder with aggravating circumstances, treason, and drug trafficking. Methods of execution vary from state to state: lethal injection, electric chair, and even firing squad. Even if you're sentenced to death in the US, there's a good chance you'll die of old age on death row before the state gets around to actually executing you. The appeals process is notoriously lengthy and complex, which some might argue is a good thing. After all, when it comes to something as irreversible as death, it's probably best to err on the side of caution. But that's a whole other can of worms we don't have time to open today. Japan. The land of the rising sun, bullet trains, and, well, a somewhat opaque approach to capital punishment. Japan is one of the few developed nations that still clings to the death penalty, but they like to keep things hush-hush. Prisoners on death row often don't know when their execution is going to be carried out until, well, it's happening. Imagine waking up, having a nice cup of green tea, and then, bam! Surprise execution. It's enough to put you off your breakfast, really. Crimes that can land you on death row in Japan include murder, treason, espionage, and even arson resulting in death. Japan prefers the classic hanging method for executions. The Japanese public overwhelmingly supports the death penalty, rooted in the belief that it's necessary to maintain social order and provide retribution for heinous crimes. There are those who oppose the death penalty in Japan, arguing that it's cruel and unusual punishment, and that it doesn't actually deter crime, but their voices are often drowned out by the majority. It's a complex issue, with no easy answers. The death penalty in Japan is a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of this otherwise modern and progressive nation. Let's be blunt. Iran's human rights record isn't exactly something to write home about. And when it comes to the death penalty, well, let's just say they're rather enthusiastic about it. Iran argues that its use of capital punishment is justified under Islamic law, Sharia law to be precise. Crimes that can lead to the death penalty include murder, drug trafficking, adultery, homosexuality, apostasy, and enmity against God. Iran employs a variety of methods to carry out executions, including hanging, stoning, and even public executions. The international community has repeatedly condemned Iran's use of the death penalty, particularly its application to minors, and for offenses that don't meet the threshold of most serious crimes under international law. But Iran remains defiant, arguing that its judicial system is fair and just, and that the death penalty is a necessary tool to combat crime and maintain social order. Critics argue that the Iranian justice system is anything but fair, with trials often lacking due process, and defendants denied basic rights. It's a system shrouded in secrecy and rife with allegations of torture and forced confessions. When the death penalty is used as a tool of repression, it's hard to argue that justice is being served. Chapter 4. Belarus, Europe's last bastion of capital punishment. Nestled in Eastern Europe, Belarus stands out for a rather grim distinction. It's the only country on the continent that still clings to the death penalty. Europe has, by and large, moved on from capital punishment, viewing it as a barbaric relic of a less enlightened past. But Belarus is holding strong, waving the death penalty flag with a stoicism that would make a statue proud. Crimes that can land you on death row in Belarus include murder, treason, terrorism, and even crimes against the peace and security of mankind. Belarus carries out its executions with a single gunshot to the back of the head. The international community has been urging Belarus to abolish the death penalty for years, but to no avail. The Belarusian government argues that it's a necessary tool to combat crime, and that it has the support of the people. However, Given that Belarus isn't exactly known for its free and fair elections, it's hard to say how much of that support is genuine. Belarus's stance on the death penalty is more than just a domestic issue, it's a sticking point in its relationship with the rest of Europe. Chapter 5. India, a death penalty paradox. India, a land of vibrant colors, rich history and a legal system that's, well, about as clear as a Delhi smog cloud. When it comes to the death penalty, India is a bit of a paradox. They use it sparingly, reserving it for the rarest of rare cases. Crimes that can land you on death row in India include premeditated murder, murder during a terrorist act, or particularly gruesome murders. India employs the classic hanging method for its executions. Despite having the death penalty on the books, India rarely carries out executions. The Indian legal system is notoriously slow and bureaucratic, and death penalty cases often languish in appeals for years, even decades. Public opinion on the death penalty in India is divided. Some argue that it's a necessary deterrent for heinous crimes, while others believe it's cruel and inhumane. Critics argue that the death penalty is disproportionately applied to the poor and marginalized. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. The death penalty in India is a reflection of the country itself, complex, contradictory, and endlessly fascinating. Chapter 6. Saudi Arabia, a kingdom of strict justice. Saudi Arabia, the land of vast deserts, unimaginable wealth, and a strict interpretation of Islamic law that leaves little room for, well, anything really. And when it comes to the death penalty, Saudi Arabia is about as subtle as a sandstorm in a sandcastle factory. Crimes that can land you on the wrong side of a scimitar in Saudi Arabia include murder, apostasy, adultery, witchcraft, sorcery, blasphemy, homosexuality, and drug trafficking. Saudi Arabia's preferred method of execution is beheading. The international community has consistently criticized Saudi Arabia's human rights record, particularly its use of the death penalty. But Saudi Arabia remains defiant, arguing that its legal system is based on Sharia law and that it has the right to punish criminals according to its own religious beliefs. Critics argue that Saudi Arabia's justice system is anything but fair. Trials are often held in secret, and defendants are routinely denied basic rights such as access to a lawyer. Allegations of torture and forced confessions are rife, and the death penalty is used as a tool of repression. When the state has the power to take a life without due process or transparency, it's hard to argue that justice is being served. Chapter 7. China, the Enigma of Execution. China, the world's most populous nation, a land of ancient history, rapid modernization, and when it comes to the death penalty, a level of secrecy that would make a sphinx proud. China is notoriously tight-lipped about its use of capital punishment, treating execution figures like state secrets. Getting accurate information about the death penalty in China is about as easy as teaching a panda to tap dance. They don't publish statistics, they don't allow independent monitoring, and they guard their execution protocols closely. China executes more people than the rest of the world combined. Crimes that can land you on death row in the People's Republic include murder, drug trafficking, corruption, treason, and even economic crimes. China has experimented with various execution methods over the years, but these days they're big fans of lethal injection. The international community has repeatedly called on China to increase transparency around its use of the death penalty and to restrict its application. But China maintains that its legal system is fair and just, and that the death penalty is a necessary tool to combat crime and maintain social order. Critics argue that China's justice system is riddled with flaws, with allegations of torture, forced confessions, and a lack of due process commonplace. When the death penalty is used in a system where guilt is often presumed and justice is rarely served, it becomes a tool of fear and repression. And that, my friends, is a chilling thought indeed. The weight of the world. So, there you have it. A whirlwind tour of the death penalty around the world. We've seen how different cultures grapple with the idea of capital punishment, how history, religion, and societal norms shape the debate. It's clear that the death penalty is not a black and white issue. It's a messy, complicated tangle of morality, justice, and human rights. The way a country chooses to address the death penalty speaks volumes about its values, its priorities, and its place in the world. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, and the value of a human life should never be taken lightly.